What if I told you that the history we learn about our gods is incomplete? That the original faces of the divine, from the temples of ancient Egypt to the forgotten altars of Europe, weren't always what we picture today. For centuries, we've been shown a version of history that feels polished to a brilliant, uniform white. We're told this is the classical ideal, the very foundation of civilization. But the evidence tells a very different and much more colourful story. It suggests that this sanitized version of the past is a pretty recent invention, that somewhere along the way, a profound and vibrant truth was buried, whitewashed, and rewritten. I've spent years digging through history, not as a tourist, but more like a detective, searching for clues hidden in plain sight. I've explored the quiet crypts of European cathedrals, stood before the sun-scorched reliefs of the Nile Valley, and navigated the bustling temples of the East. And in every place, the same visual evidence kept popping up, challenging everything we think we know. The statues, the sacred texts, the temple paintings, they all point to a forgotten reality. Many of the world's most powerful ancient gods were depicted with dark skin. This isn't just a theory, it's a visual journey. This is the evidence that the world's first gods looked very different from how they are now portrayed, and this is the story of how their original images were systematically altered over centuries. The Black Heart of Europe, the Madonna and the Goddess. Our journey starts in a place you might not expect, the heart of Christian Europe. In the hushed, incense-filled cathedrals from Poland to Spain, there's a profound anomaly. A figure that defies the usual story of religious art. They are known as the Black Madonnas. There are somewhere between 450 and 500 of these statues and icons across the continent, showing the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus with dark or black skin. For centuries, the official explanation was that these figures just got dark with age, covered by centuries of candle soot and grime. It's a convenient story, one that lets the images exist without ruffling any feathers. But that doesn't hold up. Many of these statues weren't accidentally darkened. They were intentionally created to be black. The famous Black Madonna of Częstochowa in Poland, an icon so revered it's a national symbol, is a Byzantine-style painting that has been venerated since the Middle Ages. In Spain, Our Lady of Montserrat is a powerful, dark-skinned figure who has drawn pilgrims for 1,000 years. These aren't just oddities, they are part of a huge continent-wide tradition. In France alone, there are around 180 documented sites dedicated to a Vierge Noire, a Black Virgin. So what's going on here? Why would medieval Europe, a society we're taught to see as monolithically white, create and worship hundreds of dark-skinned deities? One fascinating theory requires us to look beneath the floorboards of the churches themselves, to the pagan foundations they were built on. Many scholars now propose that these Black Madonnas might not be just Christian figures, but Christianized versions of much older, pre-Christian goddesses. When Christianity spread, it often built its churches right on top of sacred pagan sites, absorbing local gods and traditions into its own stories. And who were these ancient goddesses? In many cases, they were figures whose worship had spread from Africa and the Middle East throughout the Roman Empire. The most prominent among them was Isis, the great mother goddess of Egypt. The cult of Isis was incredibly popular across the Roman world, with temples dedicated to her as far north as London. Isis was a powerful symbol of motherhood, magic, and resurrection. As her worship spread, so did her iconography, a mother holding her divine child, Horus. The theory goes that as the Roman Empire faded and Christianity rose, these powerful dark-skinned mother and child figures weren't destroyed. They were just rebranded, veiled behind the new names of Mary and Jesus. The connection is pretty startling. The throne, the crown, the divine child on her lap. In this light, the dark skin of the Madonna isn't an accident, but a direct link to the power of ancient earth goddesses, whose blackness symbolized the fertile soil from which all life springs. The Black Madonnas of Europe, then, could be seen as a silent testament to a hidden history, a bridge to an African goddess once worshipped across the known world. They're our first clue that the divine feminine in Europe had a black face long before it was whitened. The original cradle, Kemet, and the gods of the Nile. To really get to the bottom of this, we have to leave Europe and travel south to the land the ancients called Kemet, Today we call it Egypt. The name Kemet literally means the Black Land. While mainstream scholars often say this only refers to the dark, fertile soil of the Nile, it's hard to separate the land from the people who lived there and the gods they created. Here, in the spiritual cradle of civilization, the evidence isn't hidden in crypts. It's carved in stone for all to see. For generations, the history of ancient Egypt has often been presented as part of a European story, its rulers and gods depicted as looking like they came from the West. Yet the civilization's own art tells a different story. Walk through the temples of Karnak or the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and you'll see powerful pharaohs and deities depicted with a range of features and skin tones, often a symbolic reddish-brown for men and lighter yellows for women, reflecting artistic conventions. The great scholar Cheikh Anta Diop dedicated his life to arguing, through art and science, that ancient Egyptian civilization was a foundational Black African civilization. Colour in Egyptian art was deeply symbolic. When we see the god Osiris, lord of the afterlife, depicted with black or green skin, it's packed with meaning. Black was the colour of regeneration, resurrection, and the fertile soil that promised new life after the Nile's flood. Osiris was sometimes described with epithets like the Black One, a title of honour connecting him to this cycle of rebirth. Anubis, the god of embalming, was also shown with a black jackal head, symbolising the body's transformation and the promise of eternity. This wasn't just for gods of the underworld. The revered Queen Amosa Nefertari is sometimes shown with jet black skin. Some scholars suggest this could point to Nubian heritage, while others see it as symbolic of her deification, marking her as a divine patron. What's clear is that in ancient Egyptian thought, the colour black held positive, divine power. It was associated with fertility and rebirth, a world away from the negative meanings it was given much later. Modern science has started to add more nuance to the picture. Genetic studies show that the ancient Egyptian population was complex and indigenous to the Nile Valley, with connections to both neighbouring African and Near Eastern populations. This evidence refutes any attempt to portray it as a non-African civilization. It was a dynamic, indigenous African culture that created one of the most advanced civilizations the world has ever known. Even the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the Egyptians he encountered as having features he compared to Ethiopians, including dark skin and woolly hair. The effort to separate Egypt from its African roots has been a cornerstone of historical whitewashing. By claiming Egypt for the West, an entire continent was often written out of its own legacy. But the stones themselves cry out. They show us that the original gods of the Nile were imagined and depicted within a vibrant African framework, their symbolic blackness a sign of their ultimate power over life, death, and resurrection. Echoes in the East, India and the Buddha. Our journey now takes us east to the Indian subcontinent, a land of 1,000,000 gods and ancient spiritual traditions. Here too we find that the divine was often imagined with dark skin, a truth that has been obscured over time by shifting cultural values. The evidence is woven into the very names and stories of some of the most beloved figures in Hinduism. Take Krishna, one of the most widely worshipped gods in the Hindu pantheon. His name is a direct clue. The Sanskrit word Krishna literally means dark, black, or dark blue. Traditional art and stories reflect this, depicting him with black or deep blue skin. This colouring is profoundly symbolic, representing the infinite and mysterious nature of the divine, like the boundless sky or the deep ocean. But in recent centuries, there's been a noticeable shift. Lighter-skinned depictions of Krishna have become more common, reflecting a modern colorism that stands in contrast to the ancient texts, where divine power was often celebrated through darkness. The spiritual landscape of the East offers another compelling figure: the Buddha. When early Western scholars first encountered Buddhist art, they were struck by certain features in the oldest statues. In his massive 19th century work, Anacalypsis, the British historian Godfrey Higgins made a startling observation. He noted that in many ancient temples, the statues of the Buddha had features he identified as African, writing, "In all the ancient images of Buddha, we see the features of a Negro." Higgins, whose work is considered fringe and speculative by today's standards, pointed to the tightly curled hair and other features as evidence of an African origin for the Buddha. Today, mainstream scholarship interprets these features very differently. The snail shell curls are seen as one of the 32 sacred signs of a great man, symbolizing his enlightened state, not as a literal depiction of ethnic hair. Yet the observations of early writers like Higgins are a fascinating part of this story. They show a moment when some Western eyes, not yet fully conditioned by a whitewashed view of history, saw a clear connection to Africa in the sacred art of the East. Whether you see it as literal or symbolic, the name of Krishna and the early interpretations of the Buddha's features challenge the modern assumption that divine figures of the East were exclusively light-skinned. They add another layer of evidence suggesting a now-forgotten, dark-skinned iconography of the sacred. The Great Whitewashing, Greece, Rome, and the Renaissance. Lie. Our final stop is in ancient Greece and Rome, the very heart of the Western world. This is the civilization held up as the origin of Western culture, and its aesthetic is defined by one image: pure white marble. We see it everywhere, a symbol of rationality and beauty. But that image is a lie. It's arguably one of the most successful and damaging pieces of historical propaganda ever created. The truth is, the statues of ancient Greece and Rome were not white. They were an explosion of colour. This fact, known as polychromy, is undisputed by archaeologists today. Sculptures were painted with vibrant pigments to look more lifelike. Hair was gilded, eyes were inlaid, and skin was painted in shades of red, yellow, and brown. An ancient Greek would have thought a plain white statue was ugly and unfinished. So what happened? How did this colourful world get so bleached? The process started during the Renaissance. When artists and scholars began digging up the great works of antiquity, the statues emerged from the earth stripped of their colour by centuries of burial and exposure. Mistaking this faded state for the original, they declared white marble to be the classical ideal. Early restorers even scrubbed off any remaining traces of pigment, thinking they were cleaning away dirt. This mistake was then turned into an ideology by influential thinkers like the 18th century German art historian Johann Joachim Winckelmann. Winckelmann passionately argued that the whiter the body is, the more beautiful it is, explicitly linking whiteness with Greek perfection. This wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it became a theory of cultural superiority that aligned perfectly with the age of European colonialism and scientific racism. The myth of a white antiquity was born, a fiction that gave European empires a noble, classical pedigree while erasing the contributions of people of colour from history. This erasure wasn't just about paint on stone, it was about recasting the diverse, multi-ethnic world of the ancient Mediterranean, which included North Africans, Ethiopians, and Middle Easterners, as a uniformly white space. The pristine white statues that fill our museums are not authentic artifacts of the ancient world. They are silent monuments to a historical whitewashing, a cleansing of colour and diversity from our collective memory. Conclusion. We've journeyed from the Black Madonnas of Europe, which have fascinating connections to an African goddess, to the divine symbolism of blackness for the gods on the Nile. We've seen the dark-skinned deities of India and uncovered the great lie of white marble in Greece and Rome. The visual record taken together is overwhelming. While it doesn't prove that every ancient god was black in a modern racial sense, it completely shatters the myth of a purely white antiquity that has dominated our culture for centuries. The evidence proves unequivocally that the original faces of the divine were far more diverse and were frequently depicted with dark skin for a variety of cultural and symbolic reasons. This truth wasn't lost by accident, it was actively suppressed, misinterpreted, and erased. First by the decay of time, then by the aesthetic biases of the Renaissance, and finally by the racial ideologies of the modern era. What we're taught as history is often just the story that the winners chose to tell. Reclaiming this visual history isn't about replacing one myth with another. It's about restoring a more complete and honest picture of our shared human heritage. It's about recognizing that the cradle of civilization was not confined to one color or one continent. The images have been there all along, waiting in temples and buried under the earth. Now it's time to open our eyes and see them for what they truly are. If this journey has opened your eyes to a history you were never taught, subscribe for more hidden truths that challenge the official story. The past is not as white as you think. Share this video and help restore our collective memory.